Hello, everyone. It is Kevin Henry. I'm the editor-in-chief for drbicuspid.com, as well as the host for the Dental Trade Alliance podcast. Honored to be working with DTA and thrilled to have on today Rick Van Arnam. Rick, how are you today?
I'm fine, Kevin. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I look forward to communicating to your members.
I'm looking forward to having you on, and thanks for everything that you do for DTA members. I just want to say that before we start. And before we dive into our topic, could you just tell our audience a little bit more about you, please?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm a private attorney. I work out of New York City for a law firm named Barnes, Richardson Colburn, and we represent companies that run international supply chains. And in that capacity, I work with those companies to cut through sort of the regulatory red tape that you run into bringing goods into the country, as well as taking goods out of the country. So the hot topic of the day, of course, is tariffs. Everybody now knows about tariffs, but that's something that my firm has been involved with for over 100 years. And certainly I've made up a large portion of my professional career. Now, my tie into dentistry is that I function as what's called the Regulatory Council for the Dental Trade Alliance. And when you think about it, it makes a little bit of sense because a large number of the membership of the DTA is involved in offshoring and in re-importing product. And that product might be raw materials or components or parts that are being used in the United States to make finished products, or it might be finished products that are being made in foreign countries and being brought into the United States for distribution into our commerce. So we deal with topics of tariffs and trade barriers and things like that. We also are heavily involved in regulatory issues being monitored by the Food and Drug Administration. We are very focused on these new chemical regulations that are popping up, especially at the state level. And so we're trying to keep the members abreast of those changes. We're also trying to pivot to reach other issues that have an impact on your ability to do business in the United States. We're looking at like privacy law issues. We did some work this past year on warning members about lawsuits being brought in the name of the Americans with Disabilities Act for lawsuits against websites. So we're trying to cover as much as we can, but the hot topic of the day this year particularly is tariffs.
And obviously, I want to talk to you a little bit about trade policy, tariffs. As we get into the fourth quarter, I know it's an ever-evolving landscape, it feels like. What are some of the biggest questions that you're getting from DTA members about not only what's going on now, but what could happen in the fourth quarter as well?
Well, it's everyone wants to know, has the chaos abated? Meaning, yes. You're running a business, you need to know what the landed costs of your goods are going to be, because then you know what you're going to charge for your customers. And certainly with the beginning of the new tariff rollout in 2025, because again, tariffs have been around, it's not a new thing. It's just that the current administration has used tariff policy in a way that hadn't been used, or at least as this aggressively, in over a century. So companies really are asking, do we feel that we've achieved some level of stasis here? And the warning I give is, look, we do have some calmness now because these, what we call the reciprocal tariffs, which were the tariffs that the president rolled out and assigned different tariff rates to different countries, okay? That has calmed down, at least I would say, for purposes of them getting any worse. There's a caveat, and I'll get to that in a second. The exception to this is China, in that the Chinese reciprocal rate, which is currently 10%, which is the lowest of the reciprocal rates that are in place, is set to sunset on November 10th unless the governments of the United States and China reach some level of accord that will allow for a different, or perhaps the existing reciprocal rate to be hard baked into the tariff. So those of you who are involved in China trade, you have this opportunity between now and November 10th to get goods into the country and know what that reciprocal rate is going to be. If there's no negotiated settlement or negotiated agreement, then I believe the China rate will spike from 10% to 34, maybe 35%. And this is based on the rate that the president announced for China back in April. So assuming he doesn't deviate from that rate, that should be something you're keeping in mind, that as of 12/01 on November 10th Eastern Standard Time, you will be faced with potentially higher rate for China. But the rest of the world looks like we've got some, as I say, some stasis, with the exception, of course, is that there will continue to be negotiations between the United States and various foreign countries that could result in lower duty rates for goods originating in countries that reach agreements with the United States. Perhaps a country has high duty rates on certain products and is willing to concede those high duty rates if there will be an additional concession to the reciprocal rate that the president is assessing against goods of that country. So there's that possibility. And then, of course, we live in a volatile situation where if there is a spark that is perceived as against the U.S. interest, there's nothing stopping the administration from tearing up those rates and announcing new rates. With the exception, of course, there's a lawsuit going on, and that lawsuit will very much have of the final say on whether what the president is doing can be supported with the legal predicate that the president's using as a basis to go forward.
With all this, what could happen, and certainly, as you said, it feels like some has tamped down, but still, do you feel that there's a lot of uneasiness among companies trying to figure out what comes next and what they should plan for in 2026?
Well, there's certainly some uneasiness. Again, I would say it may be less today than it was 2 months ago, because there again does seem to be some, I keep using the word stasis, but we do seem to we've hit a calming period. But the China situation looms with those rates expanding if there's not an agreement, and those companies that are heavily into China trade could see their rates spike, the reciprocal rate spike from 10% to 34%. And that, of course, would be on top of these other China tariffs that are in existence already. There's a 20% tariff on goods originating from China that is based on what we call the fentanyl issue. And then there's the legacy, because it dates back to the first Trump administration, what we call the Section 301 tariffs on Chinese origin merchandise. And with a few exceptions, those rates are either 7.5% or 25%. Now, interestingly, the dental industry did get a bit of, got lucky a little bit from the first round of tariffs back in 2018, these Section 301s, and that a lot of the items that are used in a dental office were first of all unconditionally duty free, meaning there was no most favored nation rate associated with them, and they were never subject to the 301 duties. For a large portion of the DTA membership, in 2025 rolled around, and we had these new tariffs go into place, particularly the reciprocal tariffs. That's really the first time that they were experiencing these heightened tariffs on goods, particularly coming from China. Whereas other industries that heavily invested in China merchandise have been dealing with these issues since 2018.
I know there was some talk at one point about that maybe if goods were in China that they could be circumvented and come from Vietnam or come from some other Asian country. But I also understand that that's kind of also been tamped down, where that may not be a possibility due to some of the other tariffs and the administration watching people not do that. Is that correct? Or
yeah. Well, I mean, let's just kind of focus on the concept of transshipment, because that's the term that people are going to start hearing. Historically, when we talk about transshipment, we were talking about a country that would build something. A company that would build something in country A and build it there so that it originates, and that's a term of art, but basically that it's tied to that country as its country of origin, and then ship that from that country to another country, and then relabel it with the other country's origin, and then import that into the United States. Now, this illegal practice is as old as the hills. For years, it was problematic in the textile and apparel industry because there were quotas assigned to each country. So if you were making something in, say, China, and the quota was filled there, you might try to transship it through a neighboring country where the quota was still open. But to do that, you would have to basically, lie about the origin of the product. So that has always been an illegal concept. It became more of an issue back when the first of the China tariffs went into effect in 2018, because the goal back then was, obviously the president was looking to, impart some, his foreign policy making against China using tariffs as a tool. But the goal also was to try to get companies to move out of China. So a lot of companies did just that. They might have moved. And I have always jokingly referred to the first round, the 301 tariffs, as the Vietnamese Full Employment Act of 2018, because China just moved all their production into Vietnam. Now, under certain circumstances, that's okay. You could move your production into Vietnam, and you could even source all or part of the components from non-Vietnamese sources. But whether or not the finished product could be presented as Vietnamese required it to undergo what we call a substantial transformation, which again is a legal concept, but it's the measuring stick by which the government uses to determine origin of products when the product itself is a result of assembly of different components from different parts of the world. So if you could establish a substantial transformation, you could call that product made in Vietnam and there'd be no problem, and it would come in. And in that case, there was no extra duty against Vietnamese products because this was pre the second Trump term. So we saw a lot of companies do that, try to do manufacturing in other countries, moving out of China, but the same token, trying to keep as much of the Chinese infrastructure that already existed working. And so there you had a lot of, decisions. Do we have a substantial transformation? Do we not? So that was really the next sort of evolution in why this concept of transshipment has become an issue. And now where you've got all these other countries which have different reciprocal tariff rates, now there's incentive to do the similar thing. Sure. Find a low reciprocal rate country, move your manufacturing there, and see if the product can be qualified as substantially transformed in the lower reciprocal rate country. So now we have all these different possibilities, and with possibilities goes the opportunity for, malfeasance and illegally trying to game the system. So, sure. We tell the DTA members, and I tell my private non-DTA clients the same thing, that you need to be very focused on what's the origin of your product. And because, for DTA members, their products are all typically assembled of different inputs. And as a result, those inputs could have come from anywheres. And you need to be sure that what you're declaring is correct. Because there ended up with situations where products which had never been made in country X, but had substantial, and the assembly in country X was simple assembly. And again, it's a very subjective factor, but the customs is using it these days to kind of find ground to reject the country of assembly as the country of origin. But they're finding situations where, okay, if the country of assembly involves such simple assembly that we can't say the finished product originates there, well, where does it originate? And then the agencies are looking at the various components that are going into it and basically looking for the component or components that impart the essence of the finished product. Again, essence, now we have another subjective factor. So you can have a product that was fully assembled in country X, but be considered Chinese origin because maybe, let's say it's got like a printed circuit assembly that functions as the brains of the finished product. And so customs has historically said, well, the origin is going to be tied to that particular item. So you have an item that was made in Vietnam, has to be called made in China, subjected to all the China duties, and yet the finished product and 90% of the content of the finished product has never been to China before.
It's a fascinating, evolving world. And I'm thankful that you are there to help DTA members navigate through all this. And I know you'll be at the Dental Trade Alliance meeting that's coming up just outside of Austin, Texas in November as well to help DTA members and be there to talk to them about this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the DTA members out there, you would have by now received an email from DTA to this effect, but I will be available if you want to make an appointment on one of the days. I forget which the day it is. I apologize, Kevin. But one of the days I'm basically having office hours until they all get booked up. So I think if you go to the DTA website, there's a way to lock in a half hour at no expense to you to come talk to me about whatever issue. It doesn't have to be tariffs. It could be any other issue. And if I can help, I'll offer up whatever advice I can.
And again, that's dentaltradealliance.org. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well as wherever you're watching or listening to this, maybe through drbicuspid.com as well. Rick, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I really do appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, and thank you for your valuable time.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast and to, as I say, to bring these important issues to your listenership.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for being a part of the Dental Trade Alliance podcast. Absolutely. We'll make sure dentaltradealliance.org, if you need to reach out to Rick or want to talk to him at the annual meeting in November, there are easy ways to do that. Until next time, it's Kevin Henry, host of the DTA podcast, signing off. And as always, wishing you nothing but success ahead.